Most people assume falling behind in their career looks dramatic. A resignation letter, a failed business, someone younger replacing you. But usually it's quieter than that. You still wake up early, you still answer emails, you still work hard. From the outside, everything appears stable, and yet, over time, something starts drifting. Not your effort, your direction, because careers rarely collapse all at once. They decay gradually, one unnoticed habit at a time, one compromise at a time, 1 year spent repeating the last one. And the difficult part is this: hard work can actually hide the problem. It creates the feeling of progress. Even when progress stopped a long time ago, that's why some people realize they're behind only after 10 years have passed. Not because they were lazy, because they confused movement with advancement. The first sign is that your work feels endlessly urgent, but rarely important. Your days become full of small responses, messages, tasks, meetings, fixes. Everything demands attention immediately, but almost nothing changes your long term position. You become highly efficient at maintaining the current situation, not improving it. There's a difference, and companies often reward this behavior in the short term. Reliable people become operational glue, useful everywhere, essential nowhere. The second sign is that you haven't learned anything uncomfortable in a long time. Not information, real learning, the kind that makes you temporarily slower, the kind that exposes gaps in your competence. Most people stop there. They stay inside familiar systems because competence feels safer than growth. But careers compound through adaptation, not repetition. If your work today feels identical to work from 3 years ago, that matters more than your level of effort. Experience only becomes valuable when it evolves. Otherwise, it's just time passing professionally. The third sign is subtle. You're becoming emotionally dependent on being seen as hardworking. Not effective, hardworking, these are not the same thing. Some people unconsciously build an identity around exhaustion. Always available, always busy, always carrying more than everyone else. At first, this earns praise. Eventually, it becomes expectation, then dependency. And strangely, the harder they work, the less strategic they become. Because exhaustion narrows perspective. You stop asking whether something should exist at all, you only focus on surviving it. That's where careers quietly stall, not from lack of discipline, from lack of distance. The fourth sign is that younger colleagues no longer seem inexperienced. They seem faster, more adaptable, less attached to old assumptions. That feeling can be uncomfortable, especially for people who built their confidence around experience. But industries reward relevance more aggressively than loyalty. Technology changes, communication changes, value changes. And every generation enters the workforce speaking the language of the current market slightly more fluently. That doesn't mean older professionals become useless, far from it, but it does mean experience alone stops being protection. Experience must remain connected to current reality. Otherwise, it slowly turns into nostalgia. The fifth sign is when your career decisions become entirely defensive. You optimize for stability above everything else, not because stability is bad, because fear starts driving the process. You avoid visible risk, avoid reinvention, avoid starting again at a lower status level. So you stay, even when you already know the ceiling is low. People often describe this as being practical. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's simply delayed regret. There's a moment in many careers where safety starts becoming expensive. Not immediately, but eventually. The sixth sign is that your network exists almost entirely inside your current environment. Same colleagues, same industry circle, same conversations. This feels efficient because relationships are already established. But isolated networks create isolated thinking, and isolated thinking slows opportunity. Most major career shifts happen through exposure, new people, new incentives, new perspectives, not through internal loyalty programs. The problem is that many professionals unintentionally shrink their world over time. Work becomes routine. Routine becomes social structure. Then suddenly, 10 years later, they realize nobody outside their company even knows what they do. That becomes dangerous during periods of disruption, and disruption always arrives eventually. The seventh sign is when your goals become increasingly vague, not because you achieved everything, because you stopped imagining alternatives. This happens more than people admit. At 25, ambition feels concrete. At 35, many people become operational. They manage life instead of designing it. Mortgage, deadlines, children, responsibilities. Completely understandable. But there's a hidden cost to permanent maintenance mode. You slowly stop asking larger questions. Where is this going? What kind of work do I actually want? What am I building toward? Without those questions, careers drift by default, and default paths are rarely exceptional. The eighth sign is that your energy disappears outside of work. You recover constantly, but never renew. That distinction matters. Recovery returns you to baseline. Renewal expands capacity. A surprising number of professionals spend years functioning in permanent depletion while still appearing productive. Coffee helps, deadlines help, adrenaline helps, until they don't. Then motivation disappears seemingly overnight, but burnout rarely arrives suddenly. Usually, it accumulates silently beneath competence. High performers are particularly vulnerable because they continue producing long after meaning has faded. From the outside, they still look successful. Internally, they're disconnected. The ninth sign is when curiosity starts feeling inefficient. You stop exploring ideas unrelated to immediate utility. Everything becomes transactional. Will this help my role? Will this increase income? Will this save time? Useful questions, but narrow ones. Some of the most valuable career shifts begin indirectly: an unrelated interest, a random conversation, a skill learned without immediate purpose. Curiosity creates optionality, and optionality matters because modern careers are less linear than people expect. The people who adapt best are often the ones who maintained intellectual flexibility long before disruption arrived. The 10th sign is that you secretly believe recognition should arrive automatically by now. You worked hard, stayed loyal, delivered consistently. So part of you expects the system to eventually notice. Sometimes it does, often it doesn't. Because organizations are not designed around fairness. They're designed around incentives. Visibility matters, positioning matters, communication matters. A difficult reality in professional life is that competence alone rarely guarantees advancement. Not because competence is unimportant, because invisible competence is economically easy to overlook. The 11th sign is that your confidence depends entirely on your current environment. Inside your company, you feel valuable. Outside it, you feel uncertain. That imbalance reveals something important. True career security isn't internal comfort, it's external adaptability. Could your skills transfer elsewhere? Could you rebuild if necessary? Could you operate without the current structure protecting you? These questions become increasingly important during economic shifts, and every stable system eventually changes, usually faster than expected. The 12th sign is perhaps the most uncomfortable. Deep down, you already know. Most people sense stagnation long before they admit it. There are small moments: watching someone younger accelerate rapidly, reading about industries changing, feeling strangely disconnected during meetings, realizing another year passed without meaningful movement. The awareness appears quietly first, then people suppress it. Because acknowledgement creates pressure. If you admit something is wrong, eventually you may need to act, and action introduces uncertainty. So many professionals choose a softer strategy. Delay. Not forever. Just another year. Then another. Careers rarely fail because people lack intelligence. Usually, they fail through gradual unconscious adaptation to comfort. That's the uncomfortable part. The habits that make life manageable in the short term often become the exact habits that reduce long-term growth. And none of this means you need dramatic reinvention tomorrow. That's usually unrealistic. The internet romanticizes radical change because dramatic stories are easy to watch. Real career shifts are often quieter. A new skill developed consistently, a different conversation, a side project taken seriously, a calculated risk, a deliberate move toward relevance instead of familiarity. Small corrections matter more than sudden transformations because direction compounds, just like stagnation does. And perhaps that's the strange thing about falling behind. It rarely feels like failure while it's happening. It feels reasonable, comfortable, even responsible, until eventually you look around and realize the world moved faster than expected. Not immediately, but eventually that's where it shifts.